Anyhow, so obviously what we're going to talk about today is organ and tissue donation. And how many people here already have signed up to be a donor? Well, I tell you, that's a lot. Class is over. What I'd like to do is talk a little bit about organ and tissue donation. I've got a couple pretty good stories to tell about organ donation, and one is about myself. And my wife and I went through a organ donation 2 years ago. I received a kidney from a altruistic donor that came all the way from Australia. So I'll tell you about that story. And I've got a short video on a couple different stories. So there's basically two types of organ donation. There's a deceased donor, and that represents about 2/3 of all donations today. And then you've got living donors, and living donors is about 1/3. And of that mix is about 25% of that, of the total, are relatives, friends, someone in a church, like Jim said, some type of relationship. And then this altruistic donor is someone just out of the blue, out of the goodness of their heart, I decide I'm going to be a donor. So I've got actually a couple different experiences with altruistic donors. So I am an ambassador, which is a volunteer for a company called LifeSource. And I was telling earlier about LifeSource is the one that puts on that commercial. You go into the DMV and you sign up for your driver's license to be a donor. So LifeSource puts that ad together. So they have an awareness program together to get people to be donors. And they also coordinate all the activity of deceased people, and then the people on the waiting list. So they coordinate the activity between, if there's a situation where, whether it's an adult or a child is on a ventilator system, and they're in a hospital situation where basically they're brain dead, and they have to pull the plug, kind of a crude term, but what they do is they come in and find out, okay, who's on the waiting list that has the same match of this deceased person, this brain dead person, and they coordinate that activity. So that's a pretty big undertaking. They do like a 5-state region, and locally the University of Minnesota Hospital is a transplant center. Mayo Clinic is a transplant center, and that's where I had my kidney. I asked earlier just how many people have signed up to be donors, and Minnesota is one of the most giving, volunteering state in the union. And the number I heard was that 62% of all Minnesotans have already signed up to be donors. So what I do as a ambassador for this LifeSource, I go out and make presentations like this, and I also work with a gentleman who does driver education training. In the state of Minnesota, every teenager that goes through driver's ed has to hear a presentation on organ and tissue donation. So it's an interesting situation when you're out speaking to, sometimes there's 60 kids in a class, and you just don't know if you're getting through to them. And most of them are really considerate, and they listen, and you can kind of tell when you're connecting or not. But I had a situation, it was the summer. I gave a presentation on a Tuesday. It happened to be in Shoreview, and it was the Mounds View School District and Centennial, a combination. I gave the presentation on a Tuesday, and you'll see some of the same stuff here today. And on a Thursday, I just happened to have a dental appointment. So I went into the dentist, and the hygienist was working on my teeth, and she knows my situation about my kidney transplant. And she asked how I was doing, this and that, and whatever idle chit-chat as she's scraping away on my teeth. And she said to me, this is, once again, I gave the presentation on Tuesday. I was in the dental chair on Thursday, And she said to me, she said, Don, she said, yesterday, Wednesday, I took my daughter and a bunch of her friends to the mall for shopping. And her daughter was a young teenager. And out of the blue, my daughter says, I'm going to be a organ donor. I thought, gee, that's cool. And then the mother said to her daughter, says, well, where did you hear that? She said, I took a class on Tuesday on the driver edge, and they had an outside speaker come in and talk about organ donation. I said, that was me. So I got to one student. Well, here is kind of the situation, the problem. And, there's more people on the waiting list than people willing to donate organs or qualify in the right situation. Since I put this slide together, it said there's 122,000 people on the waiting list. That's actually gone up to 124,000 people. So the waiting list is large and long. And once you're on a waiting list, you can be on a waiting list from anywhere from 3 to 5 to 7 years. And I've heard in major cities like Los Angeles or New York City, a waiting list can be up to 13 years. And while people are on this waiting list, 18 people die every day with people waiting for an organ. So big numbers, you get people dying off that list. Every 12 minutes, somebody else is added to the list of someone needing an organ. So 124,000 people are on the waiting list. Well, anyway, we'll go with what the slide says here. Kind of a basic question. What organs can be donated? We already talked about kidneys. You got 2 kidneys can be donated. We're talking about a deceased donor, someone that was on a ventilating system and they pull the plug. So they say that a deceased donor can donate up to 8 organs and can save 8 people's lives. And so you got 2 kidneys, a heart, a pancreas, lungs, liver, and intestines. And I don't know if you can see all that, but with the, they call those the 8 organs, they also can donate a heart valve, they can donate skin, tissue valves, heart valves, cornea. So one donor, they say, can save up to 8 lives and actually affect up to 60 different people. So it's a, okay. So those are we talked about the waiting list long. Here's how many transplants are done every year in the United States. So we're saying 29,000 are done in the United States, and over half of them are kidneys, and you see liver, heart, lung, and pancreas are the other major organs. So the numbers are 29,000 donations done a year. Waiting list is 124,000. So that's where you get the 5-year waiting list. So there's obviously a need for more people. I got a fat thumb here today. So we talked about the U.S. number. The Minnesota number is there was 722,000 transplants done last year. And once again, about a similar relationship. Over half of them are kidneys. And I was on that, I'm one of those 388. My kidney transplant was done on January 16th, 2013. So I'm going on 2 years. And I go back for my 2-year checkup. They do a checkup at 4 months. They do a checkup at 1 year and a 2-year. And every one of those checkups is a real thorough checkup at the Mayo Clinic. And they actually do a kidney biopsy. And so they poke it in there 3 times to make sure everything's going right. We talked about this earlier, deceased donor versus a living donor. And my donor, my kidney donor was altruistic, came from Australia. I'll tell you my story. But I've got a story for a living donor and a story for a deceased donor. And let me tell you, I should say, it says my story, but it's actually our story. My wife and she was every bit a part of this. And so I worked for, like Jim said, I worked for 3M for over 30 years, about 34 years. I retired 7 years ago. Retired early, thought had the world by its tail. First year I retired, I'm an avid golfer. I'm not a good golfer, but I love golf. First year I golfed 125 times in 1 year. In Minnesota, that's pretty tough to do. And I walked and carried my own bag about 90% of that time. So I was in good shape and everything was going great. And I'm 2-3 years into retirement. My wife and I were out in California. We have a daughter that lives out there with a young family. We were staying out there for several months, and I noticed that when I walk up a hill, and I'd be short of breath. So I actually came back. I took a physical in the spring of 2010, so that's a little over 4 years ago. And local Shoreview doctor, been going to him for years. I walk in and do the physical, and when I'm done with the physical, he said, well, would you come back to my office? We've got to talk. And I said, oh boy. So that's never happened before. So he found out I had a heart murmur in my heart. I had something fluttering there, and he said, your creatinine level is high. And creatinine is the level of your performance of your kidneys. So my creatinine level was high, and he said, look, we've got to check that out and follow that through. So I found out that I did have a mitral valve that needed repair, so I needed open heart surgery. And they also didn't know what was screwing up my kidneys. So the best thing that happened to us was we got to the Mayo Clinic. And the Mayo Clinic found out that I had a very rare blood disease called light chain deposition. Now, you don't have to remember all this. It's not cancerous, but it really screwed up my kidneys. So first thing they did was put me on dialysis. And does anybody know of anyone on dialysis? You know, it's kind of a tough situation, but it keeps you alive. And so I was on dialysis for 2.5 years. And backtracking a little bit, you know, we have two kidneys, and they're in the back here. And the function of a kidney is very simplistic, is to take the toxins out of your bloodstream. So my kidneys weren't doing that, so I had to be hooked up to a machine that did that. And it was kind of a direct line to my bloodstream. I had two ports that were hanging out of my chest, and I'd go into the dialysis machine and sit down and hook me up to these two probes into their machine. My blood would circulate around this machine for 2.5 hours, and it'd take the toxins out of my blood, take any fluids out of there, so that regulated your system. And you know, if a person didn't have that machine, you know, you probably couldn't live. It would eventually, all the toxins would overtake your body. So I'm fortunate to be able to have the dialysis. It's not a pleasant deal, but you get through it. So while I was on dialysis, they were determining, okay, what do we do? Do we figure out the heart thing first, or the kidney thing first, or whatever? So what they decided to do was they did my heart surgery, open heart surgery at the Mayo Clinic. Highly recommend the Mayo Clinic. And while they were doing that in the process, they figured out a plan, I should say, to attack this light chain deposition, what was screwing up my kidneys. And obviously I couldn't get on a waiting list while I still had this light chain deposition and attacking my kidneys. So if I got a altruist donor, a related donor, or whatever, and put that in, it would still be screwed up by this light chain. So the only way I could get on a waiting list was to attack this light chain, which I did. And I took 26 weeks of chemotherapy and steroids. And similar type of thing. You go into a room, you sit around these chairs, and they provide you the chemotherapy, but the good news is it worked. And I can recall that this oncologist was downtown St. Paul, so I'd go in there once a week, and they hook you up, and you do your thing, and I remember after leaving there, every time, my wife and I would go up to the St. Paul Cathedral. And we'd go to the cathedral, and I would sit in the same spot every time. It was the fourth row, right in front of the pulpit, and there was a sign on the side of the pew, John F. Kennedy sat here. So I thought that was cool. So I would sit and say my prayers there, and my wife, Lynn, would go behind the altar, and they have statues of various saints, and she would go light a candle in front of the statue of St. Anthony. And you'll hear more about that later, but without getting too deep into this thing, prayer does work. So I'd like to introduce you to my donor. Oh, man. I don't know up from down on this thing. So this is my donor. He's Anthony, and he's from Tasmania, Australia. And let me tell you how I met Anthony. My wife noticed, she was watching a show, I don't know if it was NBC or whatever, a Today Show, and they were talking about organ donation. And they referenced this one company called MatchingDonors.com. And so she looked it up, and I looked it up, and I signed up for this. It was a $600 entry fee, and you get onto their website, and there's 500 people needing a kidney. And at any one time, they'd have 10 to 12, maybe 20 people saying that they're willing to donate a kidney altruistically. And of those 10, probably a third of them are real. You know, that I swear I communicated with one person that was willing to give me a kidney, and if they weren't looking for money, which is illegal, they were in prison. I swear that you're just talking to all sorts of different people. But Anthony was real. Anthony contacted me, and we started communicating through this website, back and forth. He liked my profile. Like I mentioned, there was 500 plus people on this on this website needing a kidney, and you fill out a profile, and in the profile you talk about your life and this and that and whatever, and you have one tagline. So these 10 people are looking to possibly be a donor. All these people on this list were saying, help me, I need a kidney to live, need a kidney so I can spend time with my grandkids. They're all sad stories. So I used some of my sales and marketing skills, and my tagline was, Mayo Clinic will do the procedure. And lo and behold, Anthony from Australia recognized the Mayo Clinic, and we started communicating, and it was back and forth and this and that, and then he was going to call the Mayo Clinic and talk to a transplant coordinator, and I didn't want to get my hopes up too much, because you never know if it's real or not, so he talked to the transplant coordinator. They sent him out a test kit, and it's going back and forth, and he's a really good communicator, just a real solid person. And I never forget the email. It says, Don, we're a match. And he said, the Mayo Clinic wants you to come into St. Paul, or through St. Paul to Rochester, to do 3 days of tests. So we talked again and arranged it. So this communication probably took 3 months. And so Anthony brought his sister with him from Tasmania, and we met him at the airport. Lynn and I met him at the airport, and he said, well, how will I recognize you? And I said, well, I'm about 6 foot tall, 200 pounds, and I'll have the biggest smile on my face. So immediately he came down the steps and we recognized him. And we actually spent some time together that weekend. We put him up at a hotel at the Mall of America. So they went to the Mall of America. We happened to go to church at the St. Paul Cathedral. And his name is Anthony. We showed him St. Anthony behind the altar. Actually, I don't know if you're supposed to do this, but I had a picture taken with Anthony in front of St. Anthony. And there was nothing guaranteed on my being assured of his kidney. So if they had a match, they got a blood match, they was going to do 3 days of tests at the Mayo Clinic. If something wasn't a mix, they'd give it to the next person on the list, his kidney. I knew that going in. I told them that too. So they actually do a cross match the day before the procedure. So if anything is wrong, number 2 on the list gets it. So luckily everything was go. So I was on the list. Surgery was set for Wednesday. We were to show up at 5:30 in the morning. Lynn and I showed up at 5:30 to check in, whatever. Who was behind us? Anthony and his sister. And so we check in and you go up and get your gown on and your butt's hanging out the back end of those things. And Anthony went his way and we just, good luck, see you on the other end, whatever. Lo and behold, they put you into the pre-staging room and I'm there in a bed. Who's right next to me but Anthony? We chatted some more and they took him first, obviously. They had to harvest his kidney. And in today's environment on harvesting kidneys, they can do it laparoscopically. So he had a woman surgeon, very small hands. So they make a small incision and take his kidney laparoscopically. And where I had more of a major incision. And maybe too much information, but we all know we have 2 kidneys in the back, and for this transplant, they put the kidney in the front. And I can actually feel there's a little bulge there. So the story I tell is that, I'm in such great shape that I've got a 6-pack, and now with Anthony's kidney, I've got a 7-pack. Anyhow, so went into the surgery, came out, and who's right next to me? Anthony. He grabbed my arm, raised it up like that, and just a tremendous individual. And my transplant coordinator said to me, she said, Don, I've been doing this for 10 years, and I've never seen a situation this moving. And she said, would you mind if we did a PR story? And I said, I'm fine with it. Anthony's the story. If Anthony, you have to ask Anthony. So Anthony did agree, and actually 2 days after the procedure, KSTP came down and KARE 11 came down. They both did independent little pitches, not pitches, but ads or stories on the 2 of us. And actually, if I could do this right, I'll show you this.
Minneapolis and Australia are more than 9,000 miles apart, but that distance couldn't keep a special gift from being delivered at Mayo Clinic. 5 Eyewitness News reporter Mitch Pittman shows us a kidney transplant with 2 men from vastly different worlds.
As far as we've come with medicine, there's still a lot science can't explain.
Absolutely a true blessing.
Science did first find out what was wrong with St. Paul resident Don Holmes.
2.5 years ago, I was diagnosed with a rare blood disease.
Science has also kept him alive.
And I've been on dialysis for 2.5 years. Not a pleasant experience.
It was even technology that led him to his cure.
Started reading about organ donation.
Or should we say, technology brought Don and his cure, Anthony, together.
I came up with matchingdonors.com.
By now, you might be able to tell that Anthony isn't from Minnesota. Down the hall in Mayo's Transplant Center, there's a map of the world, and there's about to be a new pin on the Australian state of Tasmania.
For him to select me is just an absolute miracle.
Science can do a lot to explain what goes on inside Anthony's kidneys. It falls short, however, in capturing what happens in his heart.
It's so personal that some things we can't explain, and perhaps I'm not that interested anymore trying to explain that, because for me it's as clear as anything.
I call him Saint Anthony, and there actually is a patron saint called Saint Anthony, and that's the patron saint of miracles.
The answer to whatever inspired a man to travel halfway around the world to give a kidney to a complete stranger won't be found in science.
Just an ordinary person, but I do have passions for certain things, and you have one chance, and if you don't put your talents to use, well, you've missed the chance, and at least.
But you can learn a lot about the human spirit from this St. Paul stranger and his Tasmanian angel.
You're a good man.
Mitch Pittman, 5 Eyewitness News.
I look at that and I'm thinking, you're a good man? That's what I said. I should have said you saved my life. But I got to finish up the story on Anthony. He truly is just amazing. He contacted my wife and I about 6-7 months ago, and he said, Don, he said, I've been thinking a lot about this donation thing. I'd like to come back to the U.S. and donate part of my liver to a child. So he originally contacted the Mayo Clinic, and which did our procedures, and the Mayo Clinic actually turned him down. And they said they didn't actually turn him down, they just dragged it out. They didn't give him an answer. And they basically said they'd never done a double organ donation from the same person. So Anthony was so determined, he actually did his research, and he looked at Presbyterian Hospital in New York, Johns Hopkins, Yale Hospital in New Haven, Connecticut, and he found a surgeon specialist in Yale that has done at least one person a double organ donation from the same person. So he came into the U.S. in August, and I met him out there he had 3 days of tests, went through the whole thing. I met the surgeon. You know, he's a top-notch, one of the best in the world, and he actually used to be at the Mayo Clinic, but he said, I didn't like the Mayo Clinic because I didn't like all the administrative stuff. So he was a really good person. So Anthony was supposed to have a return on November 11th to donate part of his liver to a child, and that didn't work out. Something didn't match. So 2 days ago, sent me an email, and he's scheduled for the end of January. It's either going to be January 20th or January 27th. So he's coming back to the U.S. Lynn and I will go out there and spend some time with him. And instead of bringing his sister, we're going to be his support group. But can you imagine a guy doing that? It's just absolutely amazing. Nate, I got a fat thumb when I'm doing this. So that's our story about Anthony and what he's up to. So that's obviously a altruistic donor, living donor, and he's obviously my hero. Changing gears a little bit, I told you that I work with this driver ed training classes, and Mike is the lead instructor on that, and he's got an equally, I think, compelling story, but this is on a deceased donor. So, and it was about Mike's father. So Mike's father was a huge man. He was 6'4" and weighed 320 pounds. And his dad wasn't fat, he was big. And he had some heart issues. He had his first heart attack at age 56, I think it was, and he needed a new heart. So there's no one in this room would ever qualify our heart to transplant to that man because he's so big. You need a large person. So those are few and far between. So they gave Mike's dad 2 years to live. And when you're on a waiting list, you carry a pager around or your cell phone, and your bags are packed and you're ready to go. So Mike's father got to almost to the end of 2 years, and he was at his doctor's office, and the doctor said, Mike, you've got a couple weeks left. You go home and get your house in order. I mean, that in itself has got to be a shocker for the family. So Mike was prepared, went home, and then about a week later, his pager goes off. And so Mike's dad calls Mike and says, my pager goes off. What do we do? Mike says, you got your bags packed? Yep, I'll be there. Picked them up. They went to the University of Minnesota Hospital. And when they got there, they found out that there was a boy in Brainerd, 17 years old. He was 6'8", 280 pounds, was rollerblading, fell, hit his head, and he was brain dead. So he was on this ventilator system that we were talking about, where to be a donor like that, you've got to actually kind of pull the plug type of scenario, and then they can harvest the organs. So Mike tells the story that his was done at the University of Minnesota Hospital. The surgeon at that time gets on a helicopter, flies up to Brainerd. You know, they harvest the heart, and are flying back, and Mike was in the kind of the waiting room there, and he said the surgeon walks in with his little cooler. He's walking by with his little cooler, and he gives Mike the sign. He goes like this. That's a sign that your heart's pumping. He said, I'll have it pumping in 2 hours. And sure enough, this big man got this heart from this 17-year-old because he had donor on his driver's license. If you're less than 18, I tell these driver ed students, if you're less than 18, you have to have your parents' consent on it. So he did. So the parents honored his wishes. And Mike lived 18 years after that with this kid's heart. And he had lost some weight after that, and he had some other issues, but 18 years. And the parents of this 17-year-old kid, donated many other organs. So Mike got the heart, somebody got a kidney, cornea, whatever. This young kid helped many different people, and they actually had, every 5 years, they'd have a reunion to all these people that received parts from their organs, tissues from their son. And, you know, hopefully none of us have to ever go through that situation, but they say that the parents of that young boy is probably the positive thing that came out of a real bad situation. And Mike tells a story that when his dad passed away 18 years later, that these people came to his funeral. So it's kind of an interesting bond to the different story there. So that's Mike's story. And so you got a living donor in Anthony, and you got Mike's situation. This is a good one. This is another deceased donor.
Chris was a super kid. He was quiet And he loved his church, his family. Those were the most important things to him.
You were always in a good mood when you were with him. It was just instantly put a smile on your face. And he just wanted to make people happy.
He was the guy that asked girls to dances just because he knew nobody else would ask him. He was the kind of guy that always found the lonely kid in the room and went and talked to them so they'd have a friend. I mean, he was amazing.
It was a Monday afternoon. He was on his way to his friend's house.
They had their intramural basketball game that evening.
Christopher was involved in a head-on car accident. They told us that he was in surgery at the moment. He had internal bleeding.
And they gave us the news that we didn't want to hear.
Then told us that he was considered brain dead.
While we were in Christopher's room, the nurses asked us if we would be interested in organ donation, as his driver's license had stated that he was an organ donor. And when he passed his driver's license and we were standing in the DMV, he was answering all the questions, and I said, "Are you sure you know what that means, to be an organ donor?" And he goes, "Well, duh, Mom, of course I do."
I know he thought about that long and hard, and I know that he gave it serious thought. But I also know he didn't hesitate to do it. I'm sure he checked that box the second he could.
When Christopher was in the hospital, I just started singing "You Are My Sunshine" again. When the kids were babies, I always rocked them and sang "You Are My Sunshine."
And she kept saying, "Shine on, Christopher, just shine on down on us."
So that evening when the nurse called me about 9:30 in the evening, told me about all the people he would be able to help, they said we completed with the staff singing "You Are My Sunshine." Christopher was able to donate both his kidneys, his liver, his corneas, his heart valve, and skin and tissue to help approximately 40 to 60 people, I was told. And it makes me very proud to know that all these people will benefit and have a better life.
He is shining on through these other people, and he is shining on through our lives and trying to make a better world.
Chris shines on through other people with this gift of organ donation.
Here, my younger brother made this huge decision to want to be an organ donor and to want to help save lives after he's gone. And it made me realize, what am I doing? I need to be an organ donor. I want to help save lives. My younger brother influenced me to want to help people more. And so now I'm an organ donor because of my little brother.
So I just got a couple other slides to wrap up here is that this is kind of a summary. Obviously the waiting list is large and getting larger because 18 people die every day waiting for an organ transplant, but they're adding a person every 12 minutes. So the list is getting larger and larger. And this last video showed that Christopher, I don't know if he saved 8 lives, but saved many lives and contributed to others. There's 2 things you can do to register to be an organ donor. Number one is you can go to the DMV and check the box like that guy in the ad does. The other thing is you can actually go online, and you're not gonna remember that, but that website is on the pen that you've got and also on the literature, and it's really easy to do. You go in and you register, and all you have to do is put your driver's license in there, and they do the rest. And I think about this is that being an organ donor is a lot about knowledge, and I hate to admit this, 10 years ago, my wife and I went in and had our wills redone or updated or estate plan or something like this, and we're going through this, and they get to the end and they say, do you want to be an organ donor? My wife checks yes, I check no, because I didn't know about it. I didn't know what I know today. And just because you check the box to be an organ donor, maybe I'm repeating myself on this, doesn't mean that it automatically be taken. You got to have a really bad luck, a bad situation where you're in a hospital and you're on a ventilator system to keep the organs going, but you are brain dead. So I would say that, and I can't prove this, but I would say the odds are better that someone in this room would need an organ transplant versus the one that's on a ventilator system and donating an organ. Because just more and more you hear about it. Earlier someone asked about anyone knows of anyone that's had a transplant. I mean, half the people raise their hands. So, and the other just thought I had is more and more people today are after they die, are being cremated. And so my mindset says, you know, if a person's going to be cremated, why wouldn't they check the box and donate some organs if the situation is right prior to being cremated? So those are your options. This is what your driver's license looks like. And I thank you for listening. You really paid attention and listened to my story. And I should say it's our story. It's my wife was there for 4 years through all this stuff. And you can't do it alone. But thank you.